Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Fate Strange Fake Saber, aka Richard the First, King of England, or Richard the Lionhearted. Um, Richard's a really interesting character. I was going to try to avoid spoilers for him, but it becomes very difficult with regards to at least the naming conventions of this unit, since JP has decided to just come out and reveal his name. Um, it just is what it is. So I'm going to say that if people did not want spoilers on Richard, they were probably best, served by just avoiding anything Fate related in that regard for the time being. But it is what it is. I'm not going to spoil you guys as to Strange Fake story or anything like that. I will say there has been some questions with regards to this unit's third ascension. This is not a Strange Fake spoiler. Narita came out and actually said this is something wholly unique to FGO, so you don't have to worry about anything in regards to that. But yeah, Richard the First, he is our New Year's unit this year. He is a limited saber, as you guys can see, and he is yet another AoE Buster Saber. Now, at this point, this sort of requires me to go ahead and just state off the rip here that no, you do not have to get Richard the First. He's a very strong AoE Saber, but he is absolutely a dime a dozen in that sense, and maybe one of the more disappointing aspects of Richard is that he doesn't actually do anything truly unique. He is just a very, very solid AoE Buster Saber. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about him, where he is strong, and again, how to actually use him properly. We're going to talk everything about him, basically going through his kit here to begin with. So, starting off with the stats, you guys can actually see he starts out with over 12k attack. This is definitely a very good number. It's pretty much to be expected for some of our sabers, and it is up there in the sort of upper echelon of sabers in that regard. It's not the highest by any stretch, but it is within about 200 to 300 of the top. So again, it is a really, really nice stat to have, especially for a unit that will both card and crit hard, and you're definitely going to see that shine through. He trades this, though, for relatively anemic HP. He has only 13.6 as a SSR. This is pretty bad. We normally expect better. So, again, this is something to be concerned with. His attribute is Man. He has 99 star absorption, which is one less than the average for the class, and basically 10.4 star generation, which is right on average. His NP charge attack is basically 0.56 here. Normally with Buster units, we expect a little bit more. But again, I don't think it's a huge concern. His performance will actually be pretty good, and his hit counts are solid. We'll look at those more in a second. He has NP charge defense, the standard amount of 3%, death rate of 24.5, which is pretty much right on average, and alignment of lawful balanced. This is interesting because balanced is not a very easily exploitable or beneficial alignment, so it is something to pay attention to that he does have that. He's male gendered. His traits are Hominidae, Servant, Humanoid, Sovereign, aka the King trait, Loved One, Riding, Normal Servant, Seven Night Servant, which is the Draco buff, and Weak to Inima Elish, which is the Gil buff. So, looking at the actual deck here, he has sort of your standard deck. He's got Double Buster, Double Quick with a singular Arts card. Thankfully, though, the hit counts on the NP gaining cards here are very good, with the Quick card coming in at 5 hits, especially considering he has the Riding trait on top of that. His Quick card performance will actually be quite good. And again, the Arts card performance there should be certainly acceptable. The issue is going to be that he only has the one of it. But he does at least have the double Buster cards here, which also have good hit counts, at least for star generation. But again, could be something that could help him out in terms of firing off Buster crits after his NP, or again, just any sort of damage amplification that you might want. Having the Buster cards always good for a Buster unit. And right there, he's also got a 5-hit extra attack. Nothing too crazy, but you will see, basically as we go through the kit, that he kind of has the ability to boost every single one of his cards. The extra card is going to be the only thing that he can't really boost very much, but he does at least have things like attack up, as you see here. So starting off with the first skill, he increases the party's attack for 3 turns by 20%. This would kind of be comparable to like the charisma buff that some of the other sabers like OG Saber have. And it's definitely solid in that regard, but you can also see that he has other stuff here, including party NP gen rate. This is a rather odd inclusion on a Buster unit, but it's still better to have it than not. You never know when you're going to need NP gen, when a run falls apart, or when you're in a knockdown, drag-out fight. So it's definitely nice to have, and that one's going to be scaling up to 20%. He increases the party's critical star generation rate as well for 3 turns by another 20%. And then will grant himself an on-attack activate buff for 3 turns that basically will increase his own critical star generation rate by 30% for 3 turns whenever he attacks. This is definitely nice. This will stack, and this is something that he's going to be able to achieve relatively easy. So it is a nice aspect to it. It means that his star generation will just kind of go up from there. So the fact that he actually started with sort of the class's base star gen value rather than underneath it, definitely nice, and maybe even an oversight on the devs' part in that regard. All of this on a 6-turn cooldown, meaning you can activate it on turns 1 and 3 in Okayest system, or if you get his 5th append, that you can activate it on turns 1 and 2, which is definitely interesting in that regard. Taking a look at the second skill here, and this is going to change things a little bit. So this is going to be his tricolor buff, his steroid for all 3 of the cards that he has. And again, he is going to have quick arts and Buster performance up for 3 turns by 20% each. Neither of these 2 steroids particularly strong, but again, when you start to consider adding these up and doubling them in a Okayest setup, it actually is quite the strong setup, and it doesn't stop there, as you're also going to get the increase to his own NP damage for 3 turns by a whopping 30%. This is particularly strong because, again, you can double it up in a Okayest setup. It's got a 3-turn duration, so it'll last throughout the entire time. And Oberon is going to double the amount of the NP damage for Wave 3. So this is really, really a good thing for him to have. And it's going to be one of the reasons that, as you guys look, Richard will actually scale just amazingly well as you guys go to use him. Again, all of this on a 6-turn cooldown, and that is significant because the last effect of this skill is that it will reduce the target's cooldowns by 1. So again, this does mean it's a targeted skill. None of the rest of it is targeted, though. It's all going to be on him. However, when you get the choice to choose a target, you can choose him, and therefore you can reduce his own skill cooldowns. You could also use this to reduce someone else's if you so chose. It's totally up to you. This does make him at least have some potential interesting uses alongside, again, say someone like Arcuid or anyone else that's kind of sitting there with that, like, 7-turn cooldown, but they don't really have their 5th append. You can maybe make use of him in some sort of multi-damage dealer type of setup with him, that other unit, and then maybe a double Okayest, and it would be able to work for you. Now, with that in mind, again, this is definitely something that's going to change things a little bit for him, and the reason why I'll talk about here in a minute, but let's go ahead and let's get through the 3rd skill first so you guys can see everything here. So talking about the 3rd skill, it's going to charge his own NP gauge by up to 30%, so this is going to make him very similar to Artoria, Mordred, again, some of the other 30% chargers that are out there. The one way in which he's going to be really different than them, though, is he does not have charge after his NP like they do. That's one of the reasons they can kind of Black Grail loop at times, again, with things like Rising Mud Rain, or having somebody in there like Summer Kuro to be able to rotate the party. He might be able to do it with something like Summer Kuro, but he's not going to be able to do it in the ways that they can. So it is at least a point of differentiation between the two, and it's probably one of the ways that they tried to maybe hold him back a little bit. But again, still having the 30% charge means that we can 3-turn from at least a 50% starting charge standpoint. However, this will make you want to get and unlock his mana loading append. It's also going to increase his critical star absorption for Buster cards for 3 turns and critical damage for his Buster cards for 3 turns. Again, 500% on the Buster absorption and 50% on the Buster crit there. Definitely not anything to be, sneezed at. It's the 3-turn duration again. So you pop it turn 1, you pop it turn 3, and there you go. By turn 3, this man's going to be having basically 100% extra Buster crit built into his kit. I do wish this was crit overall and not just specific to Buster, especially given that the rest of his kit is kind of this whole tricolor thing where it's like, hey, we're going to try to buff the entire deck. It is what it is. Again, they're kind of just trying to make him a little bit more Buster-centric in that regard, so I don't really blame him, but that would have been a way to make him potentially better. From here, he's also going to just have a crit star bomb in addition to this, up to 20 stars. Really not too much of a concern, because again, in a standard sort of farming Buster setup, you're very likely to have stars rolling around. So nothing too crazy, but it's there if you need it, if you just need to manufacture a crit at the right time on the right turn. So again, all of this on a 6-turn cooldown. Now, again, if you guys remember, I talked about for each of these being on a 6-turn cooldown, you can pop them on turns 1 and 3. If you have the 5th append, you can pop them on turns 1 and 2. But with the second skill reducing cooldowns, you can in theory pop them all on turn 1. What does that mean? Well, let's explain. So with regards to the second skill here and the cooldown reduction, this is probably going to be Richard's biggest point of differentiation. That is to say, it's going to allow him to potentially store things up and pop them all on one turn. This may not be the best of circumstances, though, because when we start considering charging applications in a, farming setup, you definitely need the charge to occur at the right times. So, really, you don't really want to do this sort of thing, as it would mean, delaying things, in effect, until a later turn. And there's no real benefit to that. Just go ahead and pop them as they're ready as soon as possible, because, again, you've got the multi-turn duration, so you're gaining a lot of benefit there. The one use we really can think of it is when we're talking about one-shot damage. And what does that mean? That's basically when you just need all of your firepower in one turn. That's where this would actually be really, really nice. So a scenario like maybe a raid or a just, one-off sort of boss nuke type deal. But again, at that point, why are you using an AoE Saber for that? Maybe it's an AoE raid. Maybe it's a boss with some side adds or something like that. It could be the case. But either way, this does allow him to potentially get all of his skills effects on turn 1 should you need it. You're just not going to have the best charging scenario if you do that. But if you don't care about a subsequent turn, it's there. So this does mean that he's versatile. He basically has this flexibility to be able to, again, work normally in a conventional setup and still sort of front load his damage, or completely front load or completely back load it depending on the situation. That's, again, probably one of Richard's best aspects, as he does have that sort of flexibility already built into his kit. His passive skills here, he doesn't actually have that much, which is maybe a little bit surprising. He gets Magic Resistance B for some standard debuff resistance, and then Writing A to further boost that 5-hit quick card that he has, actually 2 quick cards that he has. So again, really, really good there for star generation and damage output. Taking a look at the append skills, I think by far and away, things like the mana loading append, absolutely awesome for you to have, as again, that's going to be that 20% on the front end of his 30% charge. That is going to allow him to start from a 50% charge standpoint. And again, it's going to be one of the things that's going to be kind of required for you to do that. However, there is also the option of the 5th append. I think this is probably your next one up for something that you should look at, particularly if you want to do that sort of one-shot damage thing that we were just talking about. Getting the 5th append unlocked will be really helpful in that regard. With regards to the third one being anti-rider attack damage aptitude, there's no synergy here. I don't really recommend it. It's not that good. The 4th append with the extra critical damage could be nice. Same thing with the extra attack performance. Either of these might, kind of fit into his already crit-centric kit, or again, tricolor buff type deal where you're maybe trying to Brave Chain with him. Either of these two things can be a good one to pick up, but to me, they're kind of sort of third behind basically the 2nd append and the 5th append. With regards to the Noble Phantasm, Richard has a 5-hit AoE Buster NP. It's going to increase the critical damage by 50% for 3 turns, activating first. This doesn't really matter, because it wouldn't matter even if you put a card in front of the NP. It won't activate until you actually NP. So the fact that it activates first just is what it is, but it's certainly nice to have. In this regard, this is exactly what we were talking about with the 3rd skill, the fact that it is an unaspected crit up. It's definitely nice for him to get. And given the fact that it is a 3-turn duration, this does mean by turn 3, you're going to have 150% of this with any sort of cards following up the NP. And that's in addition to the extra 100% he's going to have on his Buster cards from the 3rd skill, and maybe even more from the supports. So again, there is a lot of firepower there, and he is going to be carding and critting very hard thanks to this. So from there, he's going to deal damage to all enemies. He's going to put a burn of 2,000 damage on them. This does open up things like Honey Lake, but he's not really going to be someone that's going to want to start from 0 a lot, so I don't necessarily recommend that, but it is an option for you. And then overcharge effect here, you guys can see he's going to reduce all enemies' quick, arts, and buster resistance for 3 turns. It's only 10%, but it is something. This will make him card harder after his NP. And thankfully, due to the multi-turn duration, while this doesn't actually impact the first NP itself, this would impact subsequent NPs and subsequent carding if you're going up against the same set of enemies turn after turn. So again, like in a challenge scenario or a scenario in which you have break bars at play, you're going to be able to potentially stack these resists down. So it's definitely something that can help him out in terms of his overall damage and carding performance. So again, definitely a nice NP and something that you all should look forward to using. Now, with regards to craft essence recommendations, as we already denoted, he is going to be somebody that's really going to want to start from 50. That's going to make cranking sort of your best case scenario. This is, however, an older event CE at this point on JP. It has not been permanently added back to the shop yet, but who knows, maybe in the future they will. It is all attack scaling, starting charge of 50%, NP damage up of 15%, and buster up of 8% more. So again, a little bit more MP damage to allow Oberon to work his magic. Aerial Drive's another option. This one is permanently in the shop. It's also all attack scaling. Basically the exact same effects, just 5% less NP damage, but 2% more buster up. Sweet Crystal is going to be the one you're probably going to want to go to. This one's also in the shop, but it's going to cost you a whopping 25 rare prisms total in order to MLB it. This one is going to be a 50% charging all attack scaling CE that has invincibility pierce. Definitely going to be nice if something's kind of getting in the way of Richard and stopping him. And then Holy Night Supper is also another permanent option for you. This one will basically trade out the Buster Up for some additional crit damage. So it's there in case you're maybe needing to follow up with cards and crits. So it is still another decent option that is permanently available for you guys. Now, with regards to his charging scenarios, let's go ahead and talk about that. It's really straightforward. Nothing too much to write home about. It's a double Koyanskaya Oberon setup with a 50% CE. As we already denoted, you're going to basically start out with a 50% CE with his mana loading append. That's going to bring you up to 70 to begin with. Then Richard's going to pop his first 30% charge skill. You're going to use both the Koyanskaya buffs on him, and then he's going to fire off the NP the first time. From there, you're going to go ahead and basically do double Koyanskaya charge skills on him. That's going to bring him up to full again. You can go ahead and rotate for the Oberon now or wait until wave 3 to do it, but either way, you're going to fire off the second NP. From there, he's going to have all of his skills back. You're going to pop him again. He's going to get 30% charge again. And basically, the 70% from Oberon will complete the loop here as we basically get the third NP off and get to, again, capitalize on that sweet Oberon damage. So, speaking of damage, how is Richard going to look in that regard? And how is he going to stand up in comparison to some of his competition? Well, you guys can see here is Richard's self buffs only. This is neutral damage. This is not including any sort of external buffing from a command code, a craft essence, a mystic code, a support caster, anything like that. It's just Richard with his own buffs against a neutral target. And you can see here, he actually does scale quite nicely, but this is just pretty much par for the course. Where his scaling will take off is when we actually put him into a composition. And to give you guys an idea of what that will look like, you guys can see, again, here is basically going to be how Richard's going to work in an actual comp. These are still neutral numbers, but these now include Koyanskaya, Oberon buffs, your Mystic Code, your Craft Essence, all of that here. So you guys can see Richard basically at NP1 on wave 1, only going to do about 63k. This is definitely worrisome, but not that crazy considering almost all of the units out there will have at least some worrisome damage wave 1. Usually, though, wave 1 is a very low health wave, thankfully. By wave 2, he's already managed to probably get his second skill back again, and you're already looking at him getting that nice oomph and increase in damage there. So he's already up to almost 100k. And then wave 3, it basically just skyrockets, as again, you get that nice synergy there with Oberon's third skill, as well as basically all those NP damage ups that he has from doubling up his second skill in his kit. So while, yes, he can't access something like Black Grail, he can still do very respectable damage. Now, we do have the man niche here as well, thanks to Okayest, so that would be a thing, even though Richard himself does not have a niche. But then NP2 is kind of what I want to show you guys here, is you guys can see the scaling difference it's already making. And then potentially there by wave 3, you get quite a bit of difference there, almost 100k in that regard, as again, Oberon and that interaction there with the additional NP level really beginning to scale well. So that's one of the takeaways of Richard. He's not your most powerful AoE Saber, but he actually does scale quite nicely. And you can see by NP5, it actually does scale up quite a bit in terms of overall firepower. So how does this stack up with relation to some of the other Sabers? Well, here's OG Artoria. Again, OG Artoria does have two options here, sort of the standard cranking and then the sort of like, hey, I've gotten lucky in the gacha and managed to get MLB Mud Grail. If you managed to have Mud Rain already at MLB, good for you. She's definitely somebody that can loop with that in mind. And you can see it's one of the things that causes some interesting stuff here. So she's actually going to be a little bit less on wave 1 than Richard. She'll be stronger than him on wave 2 and stronger than him on wave 3. However, the thing to denote here is if we go back and we look at Richard's numbers, say even for NP2, you can see here he's at 356 compared to the 267 he was at. Well, the 267 got beat pretty squarely, but by NP2, we're already at 341. We're kind of closing that gap a little bit. So it is something to denote there that he has basically managed to sort of leapfrog her essentially by NP2 already. And that is that NP damage up. That's that scalability that he's got going for him. However, the second we start using Mud Rain, the numbers start getting better. The weird dip in her wave 2 numbers has to do with the timing of when she needs to pop stuff due to using Koyanskaya charge skills. So your wave 2 ends up a little bit weaker when you're using something like Black Grail or Mud Grail in the case of the Artorias, but it does end up resulting in higher wave 3 damage, and you can see that that composition will result in her dealing more output as a result. The same thing can be said for Mordred. As you guys can actually see, she's actually pretty much right on target with him. She's stronger in waves 1 and 2 and pretty much dead even with him in wave 3. She does have niches though, at least in play, so that is something, but she doesn't get to use them very often, and usually they're not an effective niche. And then in P2 here, you can see she actually falls off a little bit in terms of damage performance, so he will beat her there in that regard. But same deal, she also has a Mud Grail composition that can work for her, and boom, there you go. Already you're up to 350, and by NP2, you're up to 438. Now, taking a look at Arthur, Arthur himself just got recent buffs on JP. You guys can see he's only sitting at about 229. Arthur's still got quite a bit of a way to go. It's unfortunate. He really does still need an NP interlude. That's one of the biggest things they could do for him at this point. And that would essentially make his NP2 into his NP1. And you can see just how much that would actually help his overall output. But it is something they need to do. For Ibuki, in comparison, she also only has a cranking composition that works for her, and outside of her undead niche, she is much more in a precarious spot. She's not a bad unit by any means, but this is definitely one of those deals where Ibuki is kind of falling behind due to them sort of giving some of those older units upgrades. She's still a more new AoE Saber in that regard, though she's been out for several years now. And again, it's one of those things where you can kind of see a Richard just kind of outshining her unless this undead niche does come into play. In that regard, we do also have Altera. Altera is another one that's just been kind of a monster as they've upgraded her over the years. You can see even at NP1, she has no niche, very much like Richard, and she just deals solid damage. And even by NP2 there, she will still outscale and outdamage him. So that's just something that's a feather in Altera's cap. But sort of our damage queen at this point in the AoE Saber category, and it should surprise no one, is going to be Salter. And this is because Salter actually has a proper Black Grail composition due to the upgrade to her skill, and you can see just how much of a firepower difference it makes. She just easily trounces most of the other competition in this regard, unless they have some sort of niche in play. And again, that is just the firepower and actual, like, synergy that you have going on there between Oberon and a Black Grail that is really, really, really going to help her out. So, is Richard a bad unit? No, he's actually pretty much right smack in the middle of the pack. He is a little bit lower maybe on NP1 damage, but as you start getting additional NP levels of him, he scales quite nicely. So it's something to consider with him is how much you like him and whether or not you can see yourself actually ending up and rolling more copies of him. If you really like Fate Strange Fake, or you really, again, just like his overall design, he is definitely somebody that you can invest in and he will reward you for it. However, you may already just go ahead and have a strong AoE Saber. So do you have to roll him? The answer is absolutely not. You do not have to have him. He does not do anything truly unique that is a, man, I'm really going to regret not having this guy type scenario. Again, I do think that Richard is a cool and fun unit. I do think his most unique thing, as we mentioned, is being able to sort of like, again, multi-pop his skills relatively fast if you need to. But ultimately, that's not likely to be a gimmick that will be that useful over time. So it's up to you to determine whether or not you like Richard. Let me know what you guys think about him. Which one is your favorite ascension for Richard? And again, will you be rolling for him when he comes to NA? I'll be curious to hear you guys' thoughts. Thank you guys for watching, and have a happy new year.